10 to 15 people all sitting in a room. There is a curandero or a medicine man or a shaman who serves the medicine, and one at a time, each person goes up and drinks the medicine. You go back to your space. And for the next 6 hours, the curandero will typically sing songs, what are called icaros. They're traditional songs that come from the medicine. And each individual has their own experience. There's no touching. There's no talking. You basically sit on your yoga mat or lay on your yoga mat, and you become more self-aware. You heal sitting in one place by not talking to anyone and becoming more self-aware of what's going on inside.
Welcome to Anything and Everything. I'm your host, Angelo Esposito, bringing you compelling chronicles of entrepreneurship, where success means doing anything and everything. Welcome to the Anything and Everything podcast. We're joined today by GV Freeman, transformational coach and psychedelic guide. GV, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Great to see you.
Great to see you. So, GV, maybe easiest place to start is, can you give people a high level? I'm sure we're going to dive deeper into it, but at a high level, what is a transformational coach? What is a psychedelic guide?
Yeah, so the easiest way that I can explain transformational coach is I work with people who are stuck. They are usually going through some kind of life transition, or they're doing the work that they want to do, but they just can't seem to move through sort of a stage gate in their life or in their business. And oftentimes that's around sort of two things that happen. It's either a thought that has them stuck, an old belief, or sometimes it can go deeper. It can be a trauma response to something that they really don't understand. And what we do in the work that I do, whether it's coaching or guiding in psychedelics, is really self-awareness, looking at who you are. I basically hold up a mirror, as clean of a mirror as I can, for people to see themselves. And sometimes people see stuff that they don't love and they need support moving through that. And that's what I do.
Love it. Yeah. I've had the pleasure of actually working with you and going through some transformation. So I can attest to, at least from my experience, being a really eye-opening experience. And I can attest to the mirror thing, because that's exactly what happened to me at the end. I was like, oh, damn it, I see it now. So really cool. And we'll definitely get more into it. So really, I love, part of this podcast really is to understand the background and the idea behind entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs fascinate me because they're typically willing to do anything and everything to make their, venture work, and they get creative. And part of that really is understanding the story behind it. So, before we dive deeper, I'd love to understand your kind of journey to gvfreeman.com or to meetgv.com, right? What led you to want to become a transformational coach and a psychedelic guide?
What got me to where I'm at today is people asked me to do it. And that's actually really important, especially I think in the psychedelic world. Psychedelics are this sort of booming business right now, and everybody is trying to board the psychedelic train. Mm-hmm. You can't swing a cat without hitting a microdosing coach, which I have some strong feelings about, not necessarily with microdosing, but with the concept of microdosing coaches. But that's another story.
Yeah.
How I got here was the really short version is I grew up in a small little town in the middle of central Nebraska. And when I was a freshman, after my freshman year in high school, I got outed as a gay kid in a really tiny town. And my whole sophomore year really sucked. And I kind of got beaten up on the football field, and locker rooms and hallways were no fun. And what I did was I escaped to Belgium. I ended up being a foreign exchange student for 11 months in Belgium. And it was an escape in one respect, that I kind of left my tormentors, but in another way, I started numbing all of those feelings, mostly with alcohol and a little bit of cannabis at the time. And that started a 15-year relationship with substance abuse. And in 2007, I got sober. I did work in a 12-step recovery program and still am a member of that program. And Then in 2012, I found therapy and yoga. In 2015, I ended up in Peru sitting with ayahuasca, and that started my psychedelic experience. And it was all self-healing. So I was doing this for my own benefit. So there's really two parallel paths. The path of entrepreneurship. I started work in 2002 for a small computer consulting company in Nebraska. I built our first, what would be called today, like a digital agency. We called it the web services division of a computer consulting company. I was building websites in Front Page and Dreamweaver. Yeah.
I remember that.
Thank God those are gone. So that started my entrepreneur path. For the last 10 years, I've not only built my own companies, but I've also helped entrepreneurs. I serve as an entrepreneur in residence for a small tech accelerator here in St. Louis. And these paths ran parallel for a long time. And then during COVID, I had people start asking me for coaching. And I just said, sure. Actually, what happened was I went half-time with the company that I was working for. So I had extra time on my hands. So I started coaching on the side to supplement income. I had community members in my spiritual community start asking me to do work with psychedelics for them in about 2017. And that became more professional in 2018 when I got my first teacher. And then really what happened is I used a whole bunch of spiritual teachings. I used a whole bunch of 12-step recovery. I used a whole bunch of therapy and the path that I had gone through to sort of separate self-worth from net worth. Like that's really what I do, is helping people decouple those two things. And eventually people just started asking me to do that more than building marketing strategy. And this is way more fun. And I have to deal with a lot less company BS.
That's amazing. And, having dealt with, I think you having dealt with so many entrepreneurs, founders, I'd love to maybe get a glimpse of what common challenges you typically see that entrepreneurs face, and maybe, part of this is always try to maybe give some free nuggets, like high level. Any thoughts on how you typically, well, I shouldn't say typically, but how you sometimes have guided them through these journeys?
Well, I will say this, that I've never met an entrepreneur who is not dealing with some kind of addiction. And I say addiction in a very broad sense. So we can be addicted to a lot of things. Mm-hmm. We can be addicted to alcohol. We can be addicted to sex, to pornography, to gambling. We can be addicted to validation. We can be addicted to wanting to achieve big things. Like there's the thing about entrepreneurship that is so difficult to deal with in our Western society is that we're rewarded for building shit. Like we're rewarded for generating revenue, for creating jobs, and we get pat on the back. As an entrepreneur, we get pat on the back for doing all the things that eventually make us really unhappy. Because in the entrepreneurial path, the goalposts get moved. Every time you achieve something, every time you release this product, you got to release the next product. Every time you score a $100,000 client, all your investors get really excited, and then you're expected to score a $150,000 client, and it never stops. So we can be addicted to what society looks at as really positive things. And what ends up happening eventually is that we realize that we're never, ever going to be fulfilled and really happy by those the things that we're trying to achieve. So a lot of founders and entrepreneurs have this coupling with net worth and self-worth. Mm-hmm. So I like to tell people a lot of times, like what I am helping people do, the people that I help are people that already have enough, but they don't feel like they are enough. So they wake up in the morning and saying, well, if I just make this person happy, maybe I'll finally feel good. Maybe they're saying it consciously or unconsciously, but that's really what it is. And it's about kill it and crush it and just work as hard as you possibly can. And eventually, when we burn the candle at both ends long enough, they meet in the middle, and the that result is not good. That's when that's when an entrepreneur ends up in the hospital for 3 months because they're having panic attacks and they can't like self-regulate anymore.
Right. No, super well said. And I can attest to really the idea behind, it's never ending, right? And most entrepreneurs listening to this probably can relate. It's you fix one thing, something else breaks. You get more sales, now your customer success is bottleneck. You fix that, now you got to fix something else, and you need more product. You fix product, like it's never ending, and that's what I realized over the many years at my tech company. It's a marathon. Now I get it. It's a marathon. It's just like it's never ending. So it's just like how do you kind of get into a rhythm where you enjoy what you're doing, but it doesn't become, to your point, your self-worth. And it's hard to separate the two. And I guess, what advice do you maybe have to entrepreneurs who are, facing that? And, I've had this problem, and to some extent still do, where it's like a big part of my identity is my company, because that's what I do. I wake up, I do that, I talk to the team, I'm thinking of vision, new ideas, how can we grow, right? And it's, in one sense, consuming me. How do you try to separate that? Because sometimes I think it's hard, for an entrepreneur to turn off their brain, to be like, oh, I'm not going to think of my company.
Yeah. So the easiest model that I could give to unwind this, if you think of a pyramid with 3 levels, so many of us in our early stages put wealth in the bottom base layer of our pyramid. And what I would offer is that the fastest way out of this is to swap that and put wealth at the top of the pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid should be truth. In the middle of the pyramid should be health. And I mean physical health, mental health, emotional health. So if you are operating under the auspices that wealth is going to eventually make you happy, you will always be fighting for self-worth. Here's the reality. If I handed you a check right now, or let's say I've handed you a box of money and there's $10 million in this box.
You're getting pretty excited. You're exciting me.
I can already see like you're smiling, and I imagine, I hope that like most of your listeners are saying the same thing. Now there's something that happens when I ask this question. Somebody will be like, "No, it won't make me happy because I know that money can't buy happiness." And I say, BS to that. Money can absolutely buy happiness.
Right.
It just doesn't last very long. So here's the reality. If I hand you this $10 million and it makes you happy, why? Where does the happiness actually come from? Where does it come from? Where do you think it comes from?
For me, I mean, so if you're asking me, I'm picturing this now. If you give me 10 million, I guess for me, what really gives, if I go to the root, it's probably the validation, But then again, if you're getting money for free, there's no validation. But in my mind, if I think about like building something out of nothing and making it big, it's the idea that, wow, I created value. And to go back to your point, I guess now I'm seeing it probably links to self-worth.
Okay, so that's how you got it. How you got it was validation and the perception of self-worth.
Correct.
But where did it come from? Where does happiness come from?
Okay, I see what you're saying. So in this case, if it was a 10 million, it would be from other people's perception of what I'm probably doing with that money, I think.
So those other people's perception.
I mean, ultimately, I would love. Like, I'm trying to think of the scenario. Like, if I got 10 million tomorrow, that would probably be the more likely scenario of like, oh shit, Angelo bought a boat. Truthfully, the company way of me making it's like, wow, I made something out of nothing. It has more of like that intrinsic value to me, whether it's 10 million, 5 million, 15. But if you're talking like outside, like I'm thinking lottery winning, for some reason my brain goes towards like I'll probably get some level of satisfaction of like enjoying the money and maybe other people sharing that with me, or seeing that I'm enjoying it with the people I care about.
So you said the magic word, intrinsic. There is some intrinsic sensation. So would you agree that happiness actually comes from within?
I agree. Yeah.
Okay. So now I hand you this $10 million. and you start to get happy, if that happiness comes from within, what's happening inside of us that actually causes us to be happy? And the answer is actually really, really simple. There is only two reasons why we are unhappy. We are either craving something that we don't have, or we are moving away. We want to move away from a situation that's uncomfortable. So craving, I'm sitting at dinner, eating my dinner, and I want ice cream, but there's no ice cream. I will suffer because I don't have the thing that I want. It might be a small amount of suffering. The other thing is, like, I got a plate of food on my table and my parents say you got to eat all of your food before you can have said ice cream, and there's Brussels sprouts on my plate. And I hate Brussels sprouts. Now I'm in what's called aversion. I don't want to be sitting in front of this plate of food, and I don't want to be eating these Brussels sprouts. The only two causes of suffering are craving and aversion. And in the moment that I give you that $10 million, for a few moments, all craving and aversion stops.
Interesting.
And what happens when craving and aversion stop is that the happiness that it always lives within us, we get to feel it for just a moment. Now, sometimes depending on the amount of money, we can feel it for longer. $1 million, like $1 million, you can buy like half a boat. Yeah. $10 million, you can buy a full boat.
Yeah.
But the reality is, everything that we get from that $1 million is impermanent. The boat is going to eventually need to be worked on, and that's going to cause you suffering. The house that you buy is eventually going to need a new roof, and that's going to cause you suffering. The money will eventually go away, and it will cause you suffering. So here's the moral of the story. Anything that brings you pleasure externally, boat, home, money, girlfriend, anything that's outside of you that is bringing you happiness will eventually go away. So the way that we begin to shift perspective is to create happiness from the inside out rather than the outside in. And entrepreneurship is built to create happiness from the outside in. It's baked into the system.
Right.
So
that's interesting. So
truth, then health, then wealth.
So two things. One, let's start with this one, because I was actually going to ask you this first. If you look at that pyramid, can you expand a bit why truth is before health?
Yeah, because without truth, you don't know what makes you happy. Right now, you think that a new boat or a new house or whatever is going to make you happy. That is not true. So if you continue to believe all the things that a late stage capitalistic society wants you to believe, you are never going to live in any form of truth. We have actually swapped truth for fiction because we are all working for wealth, because we think that wealth is eventually going to bring us some level of happiness. When I truly believe and understand that craving causes suffering, that is a fundamental truth. Craving causes suffering. And if you don't believe that, you will always suffer.
Interesting. And so when you look at, let's say, craving or aversion, what you're saying makes absolute sense, but how do you begin to tackle it, right? If I realize I'm either, averting something or I'm craving something, what would be maybe the something, I'm sure our listeners would love this piece of this little nugget, but again, I'm sure it goes a lot deeper than one little answer, but what's something they can begin to do, or can you point them in the right direction? I say them, myself included. Can you point me in the right direction when you do have craving or aversion?
So we have to run experiments. So when we were doing coaching work together, part of that work was running experiments. If I believe something to be true, and there's the possibility that it's not, the easiest way for me to teach myself that is to go out and run myself a little experiment. We create an experiment, we create a hypothesis that if I do X, then Y is going to happen. And then you go out and run that experiment and see if it's true. So see how long If you say ice cream makes me happy, go to the ice cream store, get 2 scoops of ice cream, and see how long that ice cream makes you happy. That is impermanent happiness. Now, on the other hand, sit with ayahuasca, let go of some of your trauma, do a Vipassana meditation, sit for 10 days of silent meditation and Vipassana, and leave that experience. And the shifts that will happen from the inside out, those are permanent. And when we release, I'm going to use maybe a woo-woo word here. When we release some like heavy energy, some old trauma, some untrue thoughts, the minute that I release an untrue thought, I immediately become more satisfied, a little happier, and it never goes away. I will never believe that thought again when I prove to myself that it's untrue.
That's super interesting. That's a good experiment. And I guess it's also just from, an economic standpoint, the law of diminishing returns, right? If you have ice cream every day, eventually you're not getting that same happiness from that same thing, which is
I call it the half-life of happiness. When we were 3 years old, we could have 1 scoop of ice cream and it would make us happy. And then when we were 5 years old, we wanted 2 scoops of ice cream. And when we were 14 years old, ice cream didn't do anything for us. We wanted a really attractive boyfriend or a girlfriend.
Right.
And then we wanted to go to a really good college. And then going to college wasn't good enough. We needed to graduate from college to be that happy. And then I needed to buy a house, and then I needed to buy a second house, and then I needed to buy a boat. And at some point, the half-life of happiness starts getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And a single scoop of ice cream doesn't make us happy anymore when we have upgraded to a boat.
That makes sense. And how do you find that balance between, still, it's always a weird one for me because it's like not still being ambitious, right? Like that's just like in my DNA in the sense of like, I want to do more. I want to be in better shape. Like I strive. And I think to me, that's a good quality, like to try to be a better man. But it's like to balance that idea of like becoming a better man, whether physically, mentally, in all aspects of life, maybe business, whatever that would mean. But on the flip side, it's like being content with what you have, and it's like, how do you think about that? Like those two sides of, because what scares me sometimes about like the being content, it's like, of course I would love to be happy where I am, but I don't want to be so happy that I become comfortable and then like I have no drive. So it's like, how do you, I guess, navigate that, the two sides of comfort and ambition, I guess?
Yeah, in some ways, it's an incredibly simple answer, but it's also really complicated underneath. Mm-hmm. So here's what I would say. When you know what your life's purpose is. So I do know a lot of entrepreneurs who truly believe and live their life's purpose for creating things and for making things happen. And I think that you have elements of this, of constantly seeking and learning, and like that's part of your purpose in life. So if that is in fact your purpose, and you're doing it for the right reasons, you're doing it because it's your purpose and not because somebody taught you that that's what you're supposed to do, then it becomes not what you do, but how you do it. So my teacher in Peru says, whatever you do, just enjoy. Just enjoy your life. If you're not enjoying, then stop doing it. So I know a lot of absolutely miserable entrepreneurs who continue grinding every day, even though they don't really enjoy it. And they're doing it because, like, for lots of different reasons. Like they want the approval of the market. They want the approval of mom and dad. They want to make $1 million.
Yeah.
If you don't enjoy what you're doing, then you should probably stop doing it now. Find the thing that you do enjoy and like run headlong into that. That really comes back to self-awareness. That's really the kind of like when we say transformational coaching.
Yeah.
The way that I help people transform is just to become self-aware, to hold up the mirror for somebody and say, oh, I didn't know that about myself. Now that I do, I might act different.
That's super interesting. And you know, sometimes I think about, to just go a bit deeper on that topic, is, you know, you love what you're doing, but even when you love what you're doing, is there some type of, from your point of view, some type of, you know, ratio? In other words, even if you love what you're doing, you're going to have some bad days. So like, how do you look at, like, you know, obviously enjoying, but is there a threshold? You know, is there like
100%. Think of this like the stock market graph. So there are ups and downs in the market every day.
Right.
Every few minutes, the market is moving up and down. But
Right.
we want to look at a trend line.
Got it.
If your trend line for life satisfaction, so I work off of 3 different elements: life satisfaction or enjoyment. How much are you enjoying your life on a day-to-day basis?
Mm-hmm.
Inspiration. How inspired are you to go out and like live your dream and build what you want to build? And then, what's the last one that I'm just thinking? Success. Success is a huge part of being an entrepreneur, or just like a human in general. We want to feel successful. So success, inspiration, and enjoyment. Look at your life across those 3 vertices. And if they are steadily increasing, whether you want to look, you know, weekly or monthly or yearly, great, you're moving up.
That makes sense.
If you are consistently decreasing, if maybe success is increasing, but life enjoyment is decreasing, that's probably not going to stop until you make a change.
That makes sense. That's a good way of looking at it. Macro level, you're trending in the right direction. That's what counts. And that makes sense. That gives me a lot of clarity. But like day to day, obviously, you got good days, you got bad days. But as long as you're trending in the right direction, I think that's a good, rule.
For an entrepreneur, for a tech company, like it's going to be nearly impossible to have a release day that doesn't suck on most occasions. Like you release a new version and you're going to have bugs to fix, and you're going to have clients that are upset, and you're going to have issues, and you're like, when the support cases outnumber the number of agents that you have, it's no fun.
Yeah, I love that. No, that makes a ton of sense. And really, when it comes to your approach to, I guess, mental health, it's super interesting because you kind of combine the coaching with the, you know, psychotherapy and or psychedelics with, you know, mindfulness. I'd love to maybe understand, like, what made you combine these you know, different facets together.
If I could have strategized this, you know, 25 years ago, my life would have been a lot easier. But I got to be honest, like, it was not. I can't say that any of this was my doing and intentional. It was deeper levels of self-awareness that said, oh, wow, you're really pretty good at this. And wow, a lot of people really want you to do this. And my practice has just evolved into what it is today. It has only been through there. In some ways, there's no magic recipe to this. I'm taking people through a very similar path that I have been walking for the last 2 decades of being miserable, understanding why I'm miserable, understanding how to be unmiserable, and then doing the work to continue putting that into practice. Coaching and psychedelics are just tools. They are just tools for self-awareness. Now, there's a little bit more depth from the psychedelic perspective that I could go into from a trauma and just like a heavy energy and a cleaning process. But really, it's when we can, remember, if happiness lives from within, if happiness comes from within, if I shift my consciousness and focus and attention inward, then I would naturally get to know more about the happiness that lies within. We continue shifting our conscious externally, and we look for happiness outside of us, and that's always going to disappear. So it's only been the process of continually looking within and going deeper and deeper that allowed my practice to grow the way that it did.
Love that. And you know, obviously for some people listening, they hear psychedelics, are probably like, well, this is crazy, you know, rock and roll. So just to maybe give a bit of a, I guess, to paint the picture a little, can you kind of walk through what does that actually look like, right? Like maybe give some examples of how you use psychedelics with, you know, clients to help them. And I think maybe painting that picture would give people a better idea and a more open mind and heart to this concept.
100%. So psychedelics exist on this huge spectrum, and they were criminalized in the 1970, I believe. And since that time, we've experienced the war on drugs. Here's your brain on drugs, like Nancy Reagan standing up and telling us that we had a substance abuse problem and that all drugs should be banned. And it's been, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We don't have to go into the history, but there is the Haight-Ashbury sort of drug scene. And then if you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, it's maybe psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is a term that people will resonate with. And there's a lot of research. So for instance, the MAPS organization has been spending the last 30 years using MDMA, which a lot of people would know as Molly or ecstasy. So it was that compound, MDMA, was used in the 80s as support for couples in therapy work to increase intimacy. So we call it an empathogen rather than a hallucinogen. It opens the heart, allows us to feel more deeply. So it was used in the 80s, and then the ravers and the candy kids got a hold of it in the 90s, and they screwed everything up, and it got criminalized as well. But MAPS has been working for 30 years to build enough evidence to get it legalized again. So they finished their phase 3 clinical trials last year. They submitted a document to the FDA late last year. And we think that by mid to end of this year, the FDA is going to approve MDMA as a therapeutic tool again. Now, if we go back, 11,000 years ago, we know that the indigenous people around Mexico and southern Texas were using mescaline in peyote. So now it's peyote is primarily used by the American Indians, or American Indians, Native Americans. My teachers in Peru have been in an unbroken lineage for millennia, serving ayahuasca and another substance called San Pedro. So these tools have been used for thousands of years for healing purposes, and for a few decades, they have been used very recreationally. And for many people out there today, we have the Nancy Reagan war on drugs perspective. But a typical experience could be, if you're sitting with ayahuasca, for instance, it's a very powerful hallucinogen, often coming from South America. Could be 10 to 15 people all sitting in a room. They're sitting kind of laying down in a circle. There is a curandero, or a medicine man, or a shaman who serves the medicine, and one at a time, each person goes up and drinks the medicine. You go back to your space, and for the next 6 hours, the curandero will typically sing songs, what are called icaros. They're traditional songs that come from the medicine, and each individual has their own experience. There's no touching, there's no talking. You basically sit on your yoga mat or lay on your yoga mat, and you become more self-aware. You heal sitting in one place by not talking to anyone and becoming more self-aware of what's going on inside.
Wow.
So that's in a group ceremony. The same kind of work can happen individually with a facilitator doing work with one person, and usually there's pre-work that's done where people go and it's almost like therapy. You're prepping for the session. There's the session day itself, which is structured, and there's usually music and one person with eye shades on and laying back in a very comfortable setting and having an experience. And then there's also integration and activation work that happens after that for people to take this new self-awareness and how do we implement changes in our life to make our life more productive and happy.
Wow. And you touched a bit on the trauma side and like how maybe psychedelics can help that. I'd love to just dive a little deeper. I know that this could be a super deep topic, but can you just go a little deeper on that topic, on maybe examples or things you've seen where people had some past trauma and how, whether it's ayahuasca or some other type of psychedelic, helped?
Yeah, I'll try and offer two perspectives, because
Sure.
there's a woo-woo perspective and there is sort of a global north psychotherapeutic perspective. So let's say you are an individual who has experienced some type of really intense physical trauma. So we'll use veterans. Veterans are a great use case because they are getting early approval to be able to use some of these substances to treat PTSD.
Got it.
So you're a soldier on active duty and you experience a significant trauma while you're in Iraq. And you come home and you have your PTSD symptoms might mean that when you hear fireworks, your nervous system reacts in such a way that you think that you're under threat. When you hear a loud bang from a firework or from a car backfiring, you think that you could potentially die. And that PTSD can come out in so many ways. That's a really intense example of how it might come out. Anger, depression are all symptoms of PTSD. The challenge that we have when working with PTSD is that we never want to re-traumatize the individual by talking about the experience. So talk therapy requires an individual to go back and in some ways re-experience their trauma, which can do even more damage.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
Now, there is a non-psychedelic treatment. So for anybody out there who's like, no way, psychedelics are horrible and I don't ever want to try them, great. No issue there. There's like EMDR is a therapeutic practice that uses typically a light bar that moves left and right across, in some cases, the screen or in front of you if you're working with your therapist in person. And the eye movement going back and forth can help desensitize some of the trauma. It has profound effects for trauma release.
Wow.
Now, MDMA, we talked about before, is an empathogen. It allows us to feel feelings or to go back and investigate our trauma in a safe way that does not re-traumatize us. So we can have sort of a therapy-like session on MDMA that allows us to reprocess our trauma in a way that separates our current lived experience from the past history of the trauma. So what's happening in PTSD is we're experiencing a past event in real time, in the present moment. And with MDMA as an example, we can begin separating, our brain separates and puts the trauma where it's supposed to be. It reclassifies it as a historic event, and we don't experience it in the present moment. So that's a layperson's answer of sort of how psychedelics can affect trauma. Now, I will tell you that studying with my teachers in Peru, and this is something that I absolutely believe. David Hawkins is an author who wrote a number of books, and he has a concept of the map of consciousness.
Yeah.
And at the very lower end of consciousness is like guilt and shame and anger. And these are really low frequency vibrations. So our bodies are energy vibrates at a certain frequency. Mm-hmm. And if we have trauma that's stored in our body, that's low vibration energy. The yogis would have called this samskaras. The Buddhists would have called them samkaras. There is somatic psychotherapy work right now that believes that trauma is stored in the body. And what psychedelics can do is, this is more of an indigenous approach, is psychedelics go into the body. They scan the body for these low energy, low vibration kind of fragments.
Yeah.
And they help us either release, transmute, transform these low energy traumatic experiences, the residue that is left over from a trauma producing incident, and they release that. And through intentional work with psychedelics, we are essentially using the psychedelics to clean our physical body, our psychological body, our spiritual body. And through that cleaning process, we essentially raise our vibrations to higher levels of David's map of consciousness, which is like love and belonging. And it is a process. Psychedelics are not a magic pill. They're not going to do all the work for you. But through a intentional process and continual work with therapy and coaching and psychedelics, you can raise your vibration and feel better long term.
Amazing. And so for people listening that are like, I'm interested, I can resonate with some of these things he's saying, I'm ready to, start working on myself and become more self-aware. How can they reach you? What does the process look like? So if you just want to maybe plug where they can reach you, what the typical process looks like, and what maybe type of work you typically offer, that'd be, I think, a pretty neat thing for our listeners to hear.
Yeah. So coaching work is typically a 6-month block, and we typically do work on a weekly basis. It can feel very similar to therapy. I tell people a lot of times that I should come with a warning label. You might have experienced that as well. Therapy tends to be a little more leaned back. Therapists tend to, so if your listeners have been engaged in therapy for a while, and I love therapy. I see a therapist today. I have no problem whatsoever with therapy. Don't get me wrong. Therapy tends to be a little more lean back and a little more client directed. So the client is leading the way. Coaching tends to be a little more leaned forward. And it's really my goal to help people see themselves in a little bit faster way than therapy tends to offer. So that's from a coaching perspective. Psychedelics can be a little tricky because in most places in the United States, psychedelics are still illegal. So there are places, Colorado just passed a law to make psychedelics legal in that state. Oregon is a legal place to use psychedelics, and there are a lot of people practicing underground today. And the way that we have approached this, just like the Native Americans, in 1994 or 93, a law was passed called the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. And it specifically allowed the Native Americans the ability to use peyote for their sacrament. So imagine going to church and taking bread and wine as the sacrament. We have created the Church of Universal Consciousness, which is a religion based on the lineage from Peru that serves psilocybin as our sacrament. So we are, in a very sincere way, practicing our religious beliefs and communing with a power greater than ourselves through the use of psilocybin mushrooms. So if there are questions about that, people can reach out to me. The best place, gvfreeman.com or meetgv.com are ways that people can get a hold of me. And I will also take people down to work with my teachers in Peru. So if folks are interested in doing very indigenous medicine, ayahuasca and either San Pedro or what they call Huachuma in Peru, we're going to go down in November this year. So people can reach out to me for those too. We had a great trip last November, spent a month down in Peru. It was beautiful.
That's awesome. Okay, so you heard it there, meetgv.com or gvfreeman.com. That trip also sounds amazing. And maybe just to wrap up, any plans for gvfreeman.com, or in other words, anything that you want to share with our listeners of upcoming projects or upcoming ideas that you're working on this year?
Yeah, so there will be a book coming out in October.
Oh, nice.
Yep. So anybody can let me know. We're playing with a couple of titles. The Beginner's Guide to Psychedelics, one title. How to Heal with Psychedelics, or Healing with Psychedelics. It's really a book focused on the intentional, sincere, and use for healing of psychedelics. And it's going to be a very practical guide. So for all of those listeners that are saying, like, this sounds really interesting, I've been in therapy for 15 years and I haven't made progress, and I'm interested in psychedelics, but I have no clue what to do. That is the book that is going to be published in October. There will also be a course likely coming out in May. It's a companion piece for the book. We're releasing season 2 of the Psychedelic IQ podcast in March.
Nice.
So we're recording our 10 episodes for season 2 right now, and that'll be released in March. You can find it on any place that has your podcasts.
Amazing. I love it, GV. Honestly, I could talk to you for hours. I know you're a wealth of knowledge and so much I could learn from you, but really I wanted to thank you for being on the Anything and Everything podcast, sharing some of your wisdom with our listeners. And once again, for everyone listening, gvfreeman.com or meetgv.com to learn more. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Angelo. Have a great day.